Hey guys, what's up? It is Ripe again, back with more revenge stories. If you haven't already, please don't forget to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for exclusive Reddit content. Without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled Good Landlord vs. Bad Landlord, Decisive Victory. Background: I'm a real estate developer and investor, and I own/manage several mid-size multi-family rental properties. I am aggressive with rents, but I love the construction side of the business and take great pride in keeping my properties in excellent condition. I also ensure my staff provides top-notch customer service. I never understood why property managers don't have the same attitude towards customer service as hotel owners, but anyways. One of my friends lives in a building owned by a very traditional landlord. A grumpy old lady bangs on the door to collect rent every month. Things don't get fixed unless you threaten to file a dispute, and in general everything is fixed as cheaply as possible. My friend called me last week and said her fire alarm has been going off since 3 AM. Not the fire alarm actually, but the warning tone on the annunciator panel. This is the device that receives inputs from heat detectors, smoke detectors, etc. all around the building and monitors and provides power and battery backup. This panel was apparently detecting a fault and sounding the warning tone. This is not the fire alarm, but it sounds like a loud smoke detector going off. It cannot be silenced until it is serviced. In my buildings, they occasionally do go off every few years, and as with everything else, my staff must attend within half an hour, and in this case appropriate action would be to call the fire safety contractor for an emergency service call. My friend's landlord informed her that the contractor had been called, but it was not an emergency, so they would be there in 4 days. 4 days of this alarm going off 24/7 constantly, no sleep for anyone. This was likely to avoid the overtime surcharge for an emergency service, or about $150. But the manager was kind enough to wrap the panel in several towels with packing tape to slightly muffle the alarm. He made a half-hearted attempt to silence it by pulling the leads off the backup battery. Since the device is hardwired, this just doubled the frequency of the alarm to include a backup battery warning. I grabbed the panel keys and went over to see if I could help my friend out. I was able to open the panel since I have keys for my own and they are the same. The battery leads had been pulled off, but the main was still connected, so the beeper was going off like crazy. The manager didn't know enough to turn off the breaker in the electrical room, and I couldn't access it. The manager did not answer the phone. Upon opening the panel, I saw immediately why it had been failing on and off for years. According to my friend, the batteries were 10 years out of date and the leads on the terminals were blackened. It looked like the landlord had been swapping out the old batteries with new ones for the yearly inspection and then putting the old ones back in and maybe returning the new batteries for a refund. Now I realized why the service call was scheduled so late, so the landlord could get some temporary new batteries put in time. Now, I am a licensed property manager but not an electrician, so it would be unethical for me to remove the hot lead from the bus bar and silence the alarm. But low voltage wiring is a different story. Unfortunately, my insulated screwdriver slipped as I was tightening the battery lead back on, and I accidentally bridged the hot side of the bus bar with the low voltage side of the circuit board. Luckily, my eyes were averted to avoid arcing injury 120 volts right to the control board. Ouch! A big flash, breaker tripped somewhere, and silence. The circuit board was toast. The service tech would have to install a new panel with new batteries. My friend contacted the landlord and reported that something had happened and the panel was silenced. Also, did he intend to provide a 24-hour fire watch until such time as the fire alarm system is fully functional as required by Section 6 of the Fire Code? He affirmed that he didn't and that he could F off. Her next call was to the assistant chief fire inspector since she happened to have his business card handy. His response was much more gracious. He was happy to provide the necessary fire watch and contacted the landlord to inform him of the fact. The fireman's union is a strong one and their hourly rate for emergency services like this are comparable to a midtown Manhattan law firm. I am told the bill reached $3,000 before the landlord called the service tech to replace the annunciator panel. I would like to say he also paid the $5,000 fine, but I understand he is fighting that in court. In the meantime, the building sleeps peacefully with a fully functional and up-to-date fire alarm. And guys, I don't know about you, but I really enjoy stories about stingy people that try to skimp out on everything, especially when it comes to safety, and then in the end pay more than they could have ever imagined. But yeah, speaking about fire hazards, just I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, there was a big fire in a residential building here in Bangkok, and I think it was Chinatown or something, and in Chinatown a lot of the buildings are really old, or at least they look like that. Either way, while the firefighters were trying to extinguish the flames, the entire building essentially collapsed on them, and I think 2 or 3 firefighters died. So yeah, especially here in Thailand, it is not a good idea to live in a really old building if you ask me. And the next one is titled Meet My Grandfather. My grandfather owned a rather large farm in a small farming community. He always got along well with the neighbors, but that is until Jim moved in. Jim was someone that my grandfather had known from his time on a nearby police force. Jim had approached him and asked him to sell a small parcel of land to build a house on. It was an inconvenience as my grandfather owned the land on 3 sides of this, but the grandfather accepted and Jim started to build. Fast forward a few years, my father and grandfather continually found garbage dumped on their land. Later that summer they also caught Jim digging a duck blind in the middle of their field, and that was the beginning of the end for the relationship. After several attempts of my grandfather being civil and Jim continuing to dump garbage, things were getting worse. It all came to an end one day when my father was driving through the field in a new combine and drove it right into another duck blind that Jim had dug. Now my grandfather's farm was not just for growing plants, he had also had a few hundred pigs and a few thousand hens. He picked my father up in the field and drove to the manure at the back of the farm. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the liquid manure spreader, but they have the ability to coat anything and everything within a 40 feet radius behind the unit with a very thick and very smelly coating of crap. Well, my grandfather loaded the spreader almost full and then, just to make sure it stuck in place, broke a few bales of hay into the spreader. He proceeded to back the tractor and spreader up to the property line at Jim's backyard and let loose. By the time he was done, he had done this on all 3 sides of Jim's property and left a 4-inch thick coating of crap cemented in place with the hay around the entire property. It was that bad that Jim had to pack up and lived at a campground for the entire summer. Eventually, he moved and had to sell the land back to my grandfather at a fraction of what he bought it for. And just as another pro-revenge story once told us, never mess with a farmer. And in addition, if you enjoy the revenge stories and especially the ones about neighbors, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support the channel. Thank you very much in advance. And the next one is titled Scumbag Landlord Cannot Smell the Fish. This is a long story, but hopefully my sweet revenge will give you a fraction of the satisfaction it did to me. A couple of years ago I participated in a student exchange program in Belgium, and obviously I had to quickly find an apartment after my arrival. I was very lucky and found an incredible offer, a nice big loft with a roof garden, reasonably cheap and very close to my university. The only downside was that the current occupier was not the official landlord. He had a long-term lease but was forbidden by contract to sublet the apartment himself. He was himself going on a student exchange program and had to quickly find someone to rent his apartment, which is how he explained the rent was so cheap. He seemed like a wealthy, trustworthy guy, so I didn't mind having an off-the-books deal with him. This ended up being my demise. When I moved in, the apartment was not in excellent condition. He basically left the apartment as anyone who leaves for a long trip would have. Dishes stowed away and no laundry on the floor, but otherwise not cleaned up. All the utilities were included in the rent, which was a big plus for me considering that it was January and electricity prices in Belgium are pretty high. The central heating was broken, but the landlord was kind enough to buy me 2 small electric heaters that I could use in the living room and in my bedroom. Strangely enough, my landlord had some kind of defect/disease which stopped him from having a sense of smell. He warned me his girlfriend would be able to smell if I had smoked in the apartment. I never smoked in the apartment, although I am a big smoker, because the landlord told me he was very opposed to smoking. As is customary in many European countries, he had asked for a deposit of around 1,600 euros, 2 months' rent, to be paid back in full on the condition that there were no damages. Although not in a written contract, I still give him the deposit because he left all his appliances, including CD, DVD collection and speakers, furniture, television, consoles, etc., which I consider to be collateral. As months went by, I paid my rent to his mother, still in Belgium, on time, had a great time and did no damage to the apartment. I had a minimal but courteous email relationship to the landlord, which never complained about anything I might have done. The landlord came back a couple of days before I was preparing to move out. He came to visit the apartment and check for damages, and I was expecting him to hand me a brown envelope with the 1,600 euros he owed me after he had noticed there were no damages whatsoever. When he entered, he had a clearly fake and exaggerated disgusted look on his face. He explained that the apartment was dirty and that I needed to clean it before I received the money, which was not part of our verbal agreement. Mind you, I had cleaned the apartment entirely to the best of my capabilities and to an extent any landlord would have found more than reasonable. He proceeded to show me all the wall stains, almost all of them already there, dust under the oven, yes, under the oven, rust on some pipes under the sink, etc. Basically, he wanted me to clean the apartment as if he was about to sell it, and remember, the apartment was definitely not cleaned when I moved in. He offered to pay and go get some cleaning products for me, which he would bring back shortly. I assumed he would also help me clean with his girlfriend, but nope. He came back and basically ordered my girlfriend and I around like maids while he and his girlfriend were doing nothing. This was still to date the most humiliating, frustrating experience of my life. I knew that I had to obey his commands because I would never get my 1,600 euros back if I didn't. I probably could have legally challenged him somehow, but I was leaving the country in a few days and I preferred to swallow my pride and move on with my life. Scumbag landlord after 2 to 3 hours seemed pleased with my work and instructed me to meet him at a cafe the next day to hand over the cash. I arrived at the meeting early the next day, hungover as hell, ready to get my cash and get the hell out of Belgium. My flight was the next day. He did not have the cash with him. After I left the day before, he had called the utility company and realized that he had an outstanding statement of around 2,000 euros. Apparently those little electric heaters consumed energy like crazy. I should have anticipated this, but as the utilities were included and I had never thought of checking the evolution of my electricity consumption on the meter, which I had to unscrew a plank of wood to access anyways. Scumbag landlord, after having made me clean his apartment like a little obedient person, he was asking for the 400 euros I owed him. He himself had always paid the utilities from the central gas heating and did not anticipate a rise in electricity bills after giving me the 2 electric heaters. That son of a gun was even threatening to show up at the airport the next day and stop me from leaving if I didn't. After myself calling the utility company, we went together to their offices and realized the balance was actually something around 1,400 euros, not the landlord's mistake. I only received 200 euros in return. I had never been so furious in my life and could barely stop shaking for the next hours. I wanted so much to get revenge, but I only had 1 night left in the apartment. I was also legitimately scared that he would show up at the airport. I should mention that he was a big guy and a Muay Thai fighter. I had to somehow delay the effects of the revenge so that they would be only noticeable after I was gone. This excluded the obvious damages to the property, which was my initial idea. That is when all the pieces fit together in my mind and my evil plot was hatched. After sharing the idea with my girlfriend, we went to the nearest fish store and bought something like 10 euros worth of fish leftovers, usually purchased to make fish stock or soup. My best estimate is something like 2 to 3 kilos of fish bones, etc. For the next couple of hours, I blended the fish with a lot of water, pulled out the chunks and filled up spray bottles with a murky but very liquid fish mixture. I sprayed that fishy water everywhere, but I really mean everywhere, under the oven, behind the furniture, on the floor, the walls, the ceiling, between the drawers of his desk, under his mattress, and even on the clothing he had originally left in storage when I moved in. There is no way he could smell the fish, and he probably would not have received complaints from the neighbors until they were rotten and stinking out the whole building. To this day, I don't know how my fishy revenge turned out. I can only imagine that his friends told him he smelled like crap and or that his apartment smelled of rotting sea creatures, by which time it would have been too late to reverse anyways. It probably cost him a crapload of money to professionally clean his house, and I sincerely hope he is still paranoid about smelling like fish, but nobody wants to admit it to him. And you know guys, true story, now I never really had a landlord from hell or something, but when I was living in the north of Thailand I was renting an Airbnb, and now since we have moved out around 2 months ago, just recently the owner of the Airbnb unit contacted us and told us that the keycard to the apartment is apparently broken and that we should pay for it. Obviously we told him 2 months after we left that is a bit too late. Especially because I had pictures of the keycard where it was not broken. But anyways, if you ever had any run-ins with awful landlords, please let us know either in the comments or on r/ripe stories on Reddit. And the last one is titled, "Let me get this straight, you are mad that you saved $200? Posted by user Witch Thief on r/ripe stories. I spent much of my time in my 20s as a retail worker and mostly as a cashier. For a time I worked for a large clothing store that sells high-end brands. Everyone dreads Black Friday, but honestly, the worst day is the day after Christmas. Returns come flooding in, and with them some of the most entitled people I have ever seen. It is the day after Christmas and I happen to be working in the men's section of the store. While I am at my till, a lady comes up with a bunch of things and a sheet of paper. With no prompting, she slams the paper down on the counter and screeches, "Well, how are you going to fix this?" I'm already confused and ask her what issue she needed help with. She launches into a tirade immediately. This was many years ago and the dialogue is not exact, but it went something like this. "Karen, well, I see that you're stupid as well as unhelpful. I went to your website and bought X, Y, Z and W and B, but when I applied my coupons, you made Z free and took 50% off of X and W was free." Me? Okay, but I'm still not sure what the problem was. "Look at it." So I took a look at her sheet of paper, which was just a receipt. I find her name in our system and pull up the order number to see if I could figure out what went wrong with the purchase. Me? Well, it seems here that there was a sale on X, which is good. That usually retails for much higher. Thank goodness for sales, right? Thankfully, the coupon you used since you bought Z means that you got it for free because you also bought B, and since you had a second coupon you also got W for free. Both Z and W are high-end cashmere and retail at $100 a piece. From what I see in my system, everything was applied correctly. Our site uses an algorithm to make sure you get the best deal. Karen, you don't understand. I don't want Z and W for free. I want Y for free." Me, "But ma'am, Y only costs $30. You saved $200. I'm not sure what the problem is." Karen, "Get me your manager." And so I did. I explained the problem to my manager as best as I could, who seemed equally baffled. My manager went over to the woman and the two proceeded to have a screaming match at each other. Each passing second my manager was getting redder and redder. Finally, he asked if she wanted to return all her items, to which she demanded yes. We obliged and she left without her items because how dare we save her $200? I still don't understand. And thank you very much, Witch Thief, for posting this funny story. Honestly, I always really enjoy Tales from Retail stories because a lot of my friends worked in retail, so I can kind of relate to these stories. And ripe stars, unfortunately we have already reached the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed the content. However, if you cannot wait for more ripe content, then I suggest you head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where you can find more exclusive Reddit content read by me. Patreon subscriptions start at just $1 per month, and for $1 your name will show up at the end of each of my new videos. However, if you are willing to spend $3 per month, you will get access to more than 50 exclusive Reddit videos, mostly just no mother-in-law stories. However, please understand, I don't want to pressure anyone into spending money, because I am already incredibly grateful that you watch my videos every single day. Thank you so much for your daily support, it really means the world to me, and I hope to see you again tomorrow for the next video.